right, hello everyone. Welcome to this panel that I have the privilege of chairing. We're going to hear a lot of interesting research in the area of how to apply artificial intelligence and machine learning into the acquisition environment. First, I want to introduce myself a little bit. I am Nick Guertin, and I am the Director for Operational Test and Evaluation, a job that I just started a few months ago. I'm very excited about it. The core focus of my office is to be the independent evaluator to make sure that the weapon systems that our programs develop and produce actually work. And one of the things I hope to bring to the table in my leadership here is to help make that transition faster. So weapons that work faster. Combat credible, cyber survivable, effective, and when necessary, lethal. But the research we're discussed today certainly supports the work that we do here at DoD, and more specifically, my office. I'm excited to hear from these researchers and have a chance to dialogue with them about how their research applies more broadly. So machine learning. We're already using machine learning in a bunch of our mission systems, but it's hard to figure out what's going on. So we'll hear one piece of research on how to find that information more readily by looking at documents and using machine learning and artificial intelligence in that way. So there's opportunities to better understand what's going on across the acquisition enterprise. Several years ago, the guy who was currently the Secretary of the Air Force, Frank Kendall, who was the Undersecretary for, at the time it was called Acquisition Technology and Logistics, had the plastered on the wall right outside my office down the hallway here, a quote from W. Edwards Deming, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." Certainly that's a hallmark of the work that I do here as well. But understanding where that data is and how to curate it and how to use it in how we develop our mission systems is a big part of the research that we're going to hear about here today. We are currently not producing that kind of comprehensive acquisition report, but being able to use some of these tools to peer into that data and understand that will be interesting to see how it might be applied. So Carlo Lipizzi and his team will develop some interesting tools, sets, ideas that will perhaps afford some illumination in that area. Interoperability is an area that I'm particularly concerned about as we think about mission systems that are going to continuously evolve. And so we'll hear a little bit more about how to apply artificial intelligence and machine learning into systems and how they relate to each other and interact. Cesare Guariniello and his team provided some interesting information in that area. Acquiring mission systems that have machine learning and artificial intelligence in them is let's just say it's an evolving practice or an area of active research, as we used to say when I was at Carnegie Mellon University. But Bruce Nagy is going to take us on a nice tour into what it takes to actually buy mission systems with artificial intelligence and machine learning, and some of the more practical matters about how do we specify it, and how do we manage data, and how do we get deliverables, the real meat and potatoes of what it takes to actually do the Defense Department's work of acquiring mission systems with artificial intelligence and machine learning. So strap on, it's going to be a lot of fun. So with that then, let's start with Cesare. Are you ready to get started with your part of the presentation today?
Ready.
Excellent. Okay, the floor is yours.
Okay, I will ask if you can see my slides. Can you see it?
Okay, yes, we can see them. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I just wanted to be sure.
No.
My name is Cesare Guariniello. Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending where you are. I'm presenting today on behalf of Dr. DeLaurentis. He's my supervisor in the System of Systems Laboratory in Aerospace Engineering at Purdue. And Prajwal Balasubramani is one of our students, just started his PhD program. I actually joined this project only in the last 5 or 6 months. That's been carried on by other people. We looked at acquisition and enterprise analytics design from a system of system perspective. And we're trying to figure out what the features of system of system bring into play that make acquisition even harder than it already is. So we are trying to control what is outside our control, that also have different stakeholders participating, and this participant can keep part of their managerial independence, their operational independence. So now we might have even additional uncertainty, like Mr. Guertin said, is in God we trust, but we also need data, and we need to trust in that. So if we look at this graph of the conceptual problem of acquisition on a market decision-making process, slightly different problem than acquisition in defense, but with many similarities. We have flow of information that needs to move around, that we need to achieve and acquire. So besides the normal acquisition issues of uncertainty on the future, uncertainty on what is the impact of our choices in acquisition, we might also have some internal uncertainty on what are the desired objectives, because now we don't have a single person or a single entity deciding what the objectives are. And we might have uncertainty on what is the decision of other stakeholders. So there may be some external uncertainty. Of course, this brings a lot of research questions. We couldn't address all of them. So we started here with some first steps. And the first couple of questions we asked in this project are, if we can influence these data flows, what information we need and how we use it. If we cannot influence the data flow, so we cannot control if we got uncertain or partial data, what assumptions we make? Can we use predictive and prescriptive analytics? Can we use machine learning to support our decision-making and acquisition? So of course, as common in research, we started with a very deep literature review of predictive and prescriptive data analytics. Predictive data analytics are models used to predict the future, to try to figure out what will happen. And machine learning supports a lot predictive analytics, for example, identify patterns with artificial neural networks. Prescriptive analytics are methods for decision-making. What actions will be better? In the paper, you can see a table where we summarize some of these methods for predictive and prescriptive, and uses that already been applied of these methods in DoD. Results of our long literature review was that these are useful approaches to the uncertainty that comes from SOS features, but we need to be careful about a couple points. Predictive methods are very specific to the problem we are addressing, so it's very important to choose the right predictive. And prescriptive methods fall a little short because we have so much complexity and uncertainty in acquisition problems that actually the best prescriptive that can be used is either probabilistic risk assessment or some form of sensitivity analysis on our choices. So after a literature review, we established a methodology where system of system tools can support decision-making acquisition. So first of all, if we got a problem that is associatable to a system of systems, we have to define the sources of uncertainty. Then based on the problem, we identify what are the appropriate predictive analytics. And I will show a couple examples in next slides. We use these predictive analytics to generate the expected outcomes. What are the future trends? So in defense and acquisition, you can imagine future trends of technologies that will be implemented, but also what the adversary will do. Then there is a very specific system of systems part. We have tools to run system of system analysis where we can associate architectures. And when I say architectures, I mean what systems and technologies we acquire and how they interact. We can associate this architecture with some metrics of performance, some measures that tells us, are they good or bad? And of course, there is uncertainty in here. Now, if we have this controllable data that I mentioned earlier, so we can decide and tell somebody what kind of data we need, we can try to identify common patterns of good architectures and exploit those common patterns. If the data is uncontrollable, and again, I will show some demo here, we run probabilistic risk assessment or scenario evaluation. To do this, we can use machine learning, and in this case, I will show how we can build artificial neural networks that link metrics, measure performance, and features of an architecture. What causes a good outcome for us of acquisition? So can we identify with some certainty what makes a good system of systems? I will not go in details in the couple of demos that I have. I only want to show the basics. And then if you're interested, of course, you can read the paper or contact us. The first example we gave is what I called internal uncertainty. We can somehow drive the data. So the uncertainty due to system of systems here is not knowing what are the exact objectives that stakeholders might have. The example we built, and we wanted to make it with unprotected data. So we actually use World War II systems that you can see in this Excel spreadsheet on the right. This is part of our input spreadsheet to our method. This is a method called robust portfolio optimization. These methods take a list of systems that provide capabilities, and those capabilities can be either combined to provide high-level capabilities, mission-level capabilities, for example, naval superiority, but they can also provide support to other systems. So we have a very large constraint optimization problem, where we're trying to identify what is the best portfolio of systems we select, what are the technologies and the systems we want to put in, so that they will provide the largest possible capability, while at the same time providing the support capabilities we need for the entire architecture to work. Each system is also associated with cost and uncertainty. So we run this optimization while respecting budget constraints on the systems. The uncertainty comes from the fact that we might have multiple high-level capabilities that we want for our mission, and different stakeholders can have different ideas of what is the importance of these capabilities. For example, in this table, you can see we had 30 cases where we gave different weights to 3 high-level capabilities: air superiority, naval superiority, and recon. These capabilities were based on the systems level capabilities. So once we have these weights, we decide what are the systems that provide as much as possible system level capabilities that will result in this good outcome for the entire mission. Each combination of these capabilities, or each case, will be a different Pareto front on the plot on the right of cost versus performance. So you will have your budget, and based on your budget, you will be limited on the amount and type of systems you can choose. And you will choose system based on the importance that you're giving to the various high-level capabilities. So the problem is we don't know what the stakeholders will choose. We will have case 1, we will have case 12, we will have case 29. What we can do is 2 uses of this kind of tools to address the uncertainty in stakeholder decision. First, identify commonalities. If I say that our budget is $300 million, I have a different portfolio of systems for each of the cases, so for each of the different importance that the stakeholders give to this problem. And I can identify if there are commonalities. Are there some systems that will always be acquired? That, of course, would be a good choice. But if we still have this uncertainty, the second thing we can do is evaluate what would be the losses if we choose a specific combination. So if I take case 5, I look at the orange line and I say, okay, with this budget and with this stakeholder preference, these are the systems I will select. What if it comes up that the best system of system had a different combination of weights for the high-level capabilities. How much do we lose? So this is a way we can drive acquisition when we can tell what data we need. Of course, if we can just ask the stakeholders what would be their best choice, like put your heads together and decide, we would have only one line. Second example, if you got external uncertainty, so acquisition decision in competitive market, the example we use is urban air mobility, where we have passengers that can move between destinations, either with ground transportation or with aero taxis. The choice of the passengers is based on their income and the perceived value of time. The service provider needs to decide how many vehicles they have to acquire of 1 passenger, 2 passenger vehicles, 4 passenger vehicles. We use data from the North Central Texas Council of Governments, NCTCOG, and our uncertainty here is external. We don't know what is our available share of market. First of all, we use simple linear regression because there was a scarcity of data. So we had this idea of how many passengers will fly in the future. We had 3 vertiports location, 6 routes, and we ran our constraint optimization problem. What came out is if we have full information on market share, we prefer to use larger vehicles. This is what the optimization problem showed. Our important part here was not showing what is the exact result of optimization, but what happens if now we have partial information? We have to make assumptions. What came up is that even with smaller changes, wrong expectations, we decided here that we had access to 1/3 of the market, was very slightly different from full information. We already lost 5% of what was our expected income. Suboptimal decision just due to wrong expectations, underestimated passenger flow, overestimated. Here, but there's the external uncertainty is where machine learning can help. Unfortunately, this was an initial run of our neural network, so our factor is really, really low. We actually have to run this by separating variables and use uncertainty quantification to figure out which variables are important and which not. But the rough network already can drive some high-level decision. For example, if there are constraints that favor a certain type of vehicles, for example, 1 passenger vehicles have less constraints, the neural network is already supporting our decision and telling us your optimal solution will have more of this type of vehicles. So this can help with the uncertainty when we won't know what will be the constraints or what will be, in this case, our market share. Of course, this is something that needs to be improved, especially, and you will hear Bruce talking about that. There's a lot of ideas that are going on, and we need to be sure that we understand explainable AI, that we understand uncertainty quantification. But in general, what we found out is that predictive and prescriptive analytics are very useful for acquisition when there's uncertainty, but there are a couple of caveats. First, choose predictive analytics carefully. And based on the problem at hand, you might have a lot of limitations. Like in our UAM case, we have very scarce data. And of course, if you don't have many data, you cannot do much. Prescriptive analytics cannot usually be fully executed because of too much uncertainty. So you can modify that and do stochastic analysis and risk assessment the way I showed. And usually what you try to identify is, are there patterns? Are there commonalities in my results of different choices that I can make? And those commonalities will make sure that even if there is uncertainty, even if we are not sure of what are our objectives or what is the decisions of external stakeholders, we might still make robust choices. So we know what would be choices that would be good for sure in most cases, and what would be choices which will be bad for sure. What we need to do in the future is expanding to more problems so that we identify what type of system of systems will use which type of predictive analytics, and add uncertainty quantification to figure out why we observe certain behaviors and what are the variables that actually count in decision making. And with this, I will pass it back.
So Cesare, excellent presentation. First of all, some comprehensive work put into a very understandable approach and bang, ended right on time. That's
Wow. I wasn't worried about being the first.
very impressive. Setting a very high bar for the other two panelists. By the way, I meant to mention at the beginning, put your questions in the Q&A section you see at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to them when we get to the last presentation. So definitely get your thoughts down on questions you might want to ask Cesare and the rest of the presenters, but we're going to deal with those after all three presentations have been completed. All right, so with that then, we're ready for, I think, is it Bruce that's next? Yes, Bruce Nagy from, you're out at China Lake, right, Bruce?
I am, yes, sir.
Yeah, so Weapons Division.
Weapons
Excellent.
Division.
Yeah, so I'm particularly interested in the work that you're doing because it leads right into how do we specify and then acquire machine learning and artificial intelligence. And so I've got my ears up and I'm ready to hear some amazingness.
Well, hopefully I give you something. So this is an area I thought that was lacking. There were two main areas I think are lacking in the in DoD, if I might be so bold. One is how to develop the technology, AI technology, and the other one is how to test it. So those are the two areas that I actually focus on at China Lake. And so in this case, this is how to develop it. And it was actually based on work I did called Level of Rigor, and there were 14 tasks. We're going to go through the first 9, but the 14 tasks, and they go through the process requirements, architecture, algorithm design, algorithm code, test, and evaluation. We're going to focus on the first 9, and it could be expanded to all 14, but honestly, the paper was like 28 pages. And I stopped at 9. I thought it was a good place to stop, but you can apply this. It talks about creating an artificial intelligence development plan versus a software development plan. And hopefully I learned lessons from all the types of software development plans that were out there and didn't fall into the same trap, where this hopefully can be used for years to come, and that's my hope. The Naval Ordnance Safety and Security Agency has funded a lot of this work because they were into safety. They hired me, and I said, well, let me go do a sandbox. And what a sandbox is, I actually developed AI code. I created an artificial a product or a series of products, generated the AI code, and from that code we looked at how the best to develop it. So this was real stuff. And then what I did was I sent it out to a lot of people. There are about 50 reviewers, and I'm creating some structures to support it. OSD is supporting it. In fact, next week there's going to be an OSD sponsored meeting associated with it. Associated with looking at all 14 of these tasks I developed, but I wanted to get it out. I want to hear what people say. It's cross DoD wide, even though it looks like it's focused on a lot on the Navy, but it was actually I had Army Research Lab, our Air Force Research Lab take a look as well. And again, it's based upon a sandbox, and what we did was to make it unclassified. We basically said, hey, there's some trucks. They are developing delivering packages. Those packages, they pick up robots in a truck. The truck takes it off to a place. They drop the robots off. Those folks move to the robots move to various areas. They have to overcome certain obstacles, hazards per se, don't run into buildings, repel crime, to go over slippery surfaces and find the right person to give these 2 packages to. So that was the use case. So I developed a technology to support that use case. So when I say developed it, I mean, I went down to DODAF level diagrams, UML level diagrams, looked at messages, looked at API layers, looked at SQL commands, So I really decided to go deep. And so all of these things actually came out from doing a formal decomposition of these systems and how these systems relate to each other. I thought if I was going to recommend something, I should recommend it based upon me not, saying, wow, hey, I have an idea, but really some firm foundational structures on how to do things. So what I did, what it came out is I came up with 14 tasks of level of rigor, and I'm going to go through the first 9. As I said, China Lake actually developed a technical publication on all 14. If you're interested, it's distribution A. And again, it's getting reviewed by OSD next week at an Indian Head area in Maryland. But what it did was it went through the requirements, architecture, algorithm design, algorithm code, test and evaluation structures, and I incorporated that in an AI development plan. And if you get a chance, it'd be great to look at the document because I broke up those into sections, and hopefully that'll make some sense to everybody. The other thing that I decided to do is I looked at levels of confidence. So in other words, I had 5 levels: highly confident to minimally confident, and it was mentioned total quality management, W. Edwards Deming, which I studied actually statistical process control. And the point here is that the way you can gain quality in the development of artificial intelligence is to have control over how it's being developed. And so what the paper describes and what the technical pub describes over these 14 tasks over these 5 stages is gaining more and more control. And the more confidence you have in the development and the quality of the development deals with the more control you have. And that's just based upon, the following the statistical process control structures that I learned from Deming, actually. So that's what this diagram is about. And again, the paper goes into detail on it. The other interesting part about developing AI, and I think it needs to be understood, is that when you develop AI, you see a brown part and a blue part. Well, the brown part is what happens prior to deployment. And most folks, when they look at testing, like operational testing, they say, well, we're going to look at the final product. But reality is you need to look at it right up front. In other words, when you create your data set, which has significant impact on the quality of your algorithm, quality in, quality out. When you have your data set that drives what that algorithm's performance is going to be, you need to do what we call k-fold cross-validation. You need to take a snippet of that data set and hide it, keep it to you. The operational testers, you don't want anyone to see it because that's what you're going to test the final product on and how well they did it, right? So you need to take that, and we'll go through that, but you need to take that. And it becomes very important that you understand, and I recently did a paper in a previous session on trust. What you're trusting is the data set, and there's no one that can tell me something differently. The data set has to contain whatever that operational experience is going to be, and if you don't trust that it does, then the trust is not going to exist. And so in a previous paper, I talked about trust in terms of earning trust. You have to earn it. You start to build it. So what this diagram basically says is that, look, on this brown side, these guys and the system, and I don't want to get into the specifics of the AI. We had 17 attributes over 5 classes. I won't get into technical aspects. I did a lot of different types of AI associated with it. But what the point of this is that these guys on the brown side are creating a data set and they're predicting what's going to happen years from now. Think how challenging that is. Think about what an operator is going to input in his attributes or structures years from now, and they have to figure that out, put that in the data set, and have it ready. So this is really about creating that rigor to have your best shot at being able to do that. That was the point of that. And again, if I put up a signal flag of saying that's dangerous, it needs a lot of rigor. It needs it. This is not when I'm going to consider some optional things. So let's get involved in, now these are created in the document I wrote, are created in sections. So there's sections, but I'm going to talk about what the actual tasks are in this presentation, and you'll see that they're translated into sections and things to talk about. All these levels of rigor are structured in terms of a question or a consideration. And so the first three, and actually these first three got accepted in an OSD related white paper for functional hazard analysis on how to recognize if it's an AI system. And you might say, well, if it shouldn't be obvious. Well, someone's not going to tell you they're using a convolutional neural net. They're going to say, we have this system and it has widget A. And then you sort of got to dig into it. So what we look at is that we have two criteria. We say, is the algorithm building itself based on data approximations? And is the algorithm building itself based upon data sampling? And if it is, that's adding risk because you're approximating something or you're sampling something. And when it gets deployed, is that sample sufficient? And it's called a process called generalization. Is that sufficient? And that becomes the question that needs to ask. But I will tell you now, that's risk. So because of that being risk, what I'm basically saying is that justify why you need to take that risk versus traditional code. And if you can't justify it, and in the document, it goes into detail on how to maybe overcome that. And if you can, and then make sure that it has the least autonomy, that means that there's somebody watching it, because understand you're approximating something, you're sampling something, you're looking out into the future and saying, this is going to cover it. Just from a common sense standpoint, you don't want that unless you need to. And I'm not saying I'm an AI person. I love what it can do, the generalization capabilities that it can do. But you have to understand the risks associated with it and then how to counter those risks. And that's very important. That's what this doc and a lot of other docs that I created are attempting to support. Okay, so let's go into the fourth one. And it's just best practices. I list a series of best practices there. I won't go through those. You can read those in the document, but there are some best practices that I highly recommend. I think, again, from an AI standpoint, a lot of them are very much common sense based in terms of how to develop AI. Okay. There was another paper I actually did last year on what's called TSATs and star ends, and TSATs and star ends, and it was about how to look at your data set. Remember I said how important data sets are? Well, how to look at that data set and basically says, do I have a handle on it? And one of the things about one of the papers I wrote previously that I talked about was trusting. You got to trust the data set, right? You have to trust the data set. That means you need an operational person that's going to use it to say, hey, by the way, this is what's important to me. So literally every attribute that you have, every feature you have that algorithm is going to be involved in. What I'm asking folks to do is I'm asking folks, if you really want to be able to know your data set, is to rank them in priority. That's easier said than done, but I think it's a necessity. And then there's a mathematical technique that I describe in different papers I wrote, but I think I describe it in this paper as well. Well, I know I described it in this paper well, to be able to look at it and say, how aligned are you to its operational experience? How aligned is that data set to what's going to be operationally? And we have a default of 50%. That means I'm only 50% aligned. You better be higher than that. And some folks push back and say, well, that's a lot of work. Well, if you want to use AI, my friend, yeah, you have to go through the work. So that's my message to people. Then the other thing is, this should actually say star N. I thought I changed that. It should be a star N. Let's see. And a star N, it basically is a source to attribute ratio. And the source to attribute ratio basically looks at the class, and classes are what you classify, or attributes, or what you're resting on, or what that might be. So he looks at the class and basically says, well, regression would be a little different than class, but basically for now, for the example, looks at the class and says, okay, number of primary attributes versus all the attributes available. So it's looking at ratios. It's basically saying, tell me how many attributes are your primary attributes, things that your AI is going to learn from primarily, and then do you have secondary things? Why is it important to have secondary things? It's important to have secondary things because your primary things may not always be there. In a deployed environment, your radar system, your communication system, whatever system you're depending on may not exist. In fact, the enemy may not want it to exist, right? So you need to deal with that. You need to compensate for that. You need to be prepared for that. And your data set should be able to do that. And this is looking at these ratios. These are placing this color structure to make sure that you have the right ratios, so you're actually developing it properly. I go through, I'm not sure I go through and as much in this doc, but I do in another doc on how do you just interpret it just by looking at graphs, by looking at pie graphs. But again, it's very important because you're trying to get a handle on that data set. This deals with the quantity of things because we're dealing with ratios. The previous one dealt with the quality of the data, looking at ranking it, make sure it's aligned to your operational deployment. Okay, on the seventh test, well, again, we're back to the review.
Bruce, we're going to have to give you the hook here pretty soon. Can you drive us to completion here?
I
mean, you're definitely in the zone, man. I'm feeling it.
I'm sorry. Okay, so now we're looking at a different perspective, different requirements. I'm going to keep moving forward. We're looking at configuration management of that and the blockchain associated with that. We're looking at breaking missing and sparse data issues and creating specific tables, which outlines those tables. And the bottom line is these are the first 9. I think they're vital. They consist of, if you look at the document, the AI development plan. And so I highly recommend people look at the doc, and when they're looking at developing AI, consider some of the questions and statements being made in the document. Thank you.
All right, Bruce, I'm looking forward to the Q&A on your presentation because you have a lot of energy in that, and I'm sure there's going to be more than a few opinions out there that we'll have a chance to explore. But we're going to switch over to Carlo Lipizzi from the Stevens Institute. Carlo, are you ready to go?
Yep, ready to go. Thank you,
All right.
Nick. Thank you, the previous panelists. Very interesting. I really enjoyed your presentations. So let me start sharing my screen and let me go with my PowerPoint. So the focus of the next 15 minutes will be on natural language processing. Natural language processing applied to a specific case that is creating a system for recommending recommendations. So the DAU is receiving recommendations from different stakeholders. They may be a few pages, they may be a few hundred pages, and not all the recommendations are created equal, and some are may be more relevant than others. So the idea is to find a computer-supported method to go through those recommendations on a more efficient way. So recommendations are text. Text is a language. Language, it's obviously everywhere. So we are human beings. We are using language for communicating. The vast majority of the documents that we have around is text. So we can use natural language processing or understanding in insurance, law, academic research, basically in every aspect of our life. Working with language, that is the primary goal of my research since a few years. I started working in artificial intelligence in 1986, yes. And at that time, the algorithms were there, but we didn't have the power, the computing power that we have now, and a bunch of other key ingredients. but the challenges are the same. So language is for human beings. There are challenges like the one that you see on your screen. So when you talk about a car, you can address the car as vehicle, automobile, or a given brand. When you talk about Apple, you may refer to the company or the fruit, depending on the context. Then there are some more formal ambiguities, misspelling, different word for the same concepts. And then the bigger issue is the implicit knowledge that you have when you are reading something. If you have a bunch of things on a table, then if they are, I don't know, a notepad, a clipper, things like that, then you can say, okay, it's about office, but there is nothing with the label office there, meaning you know because you know it. So those are the challenges that you have in natural language processing. When we talk about processing, it's not a statistical approach. So we can count the number of words. We can determine what are the words that are more frequent. We can determine in a single text what is the entropy, meaning what is the variety of words. But those will not give us much of the understanding. So historically, the problem of addressing the language is part of the problem of representing the knowledge. So representing the knowledge it has been driven by two different approaches. And I mean, it's few thousand years we are working on this problem, and I don't presume that I will have the solution, but I definitely want to address the problem and give my contribution. So the two approaches are one that is more what philosophically was the rationalists, meaning those based on the concept that knowledge is created by we have rules that are embedded in our body, and we analyze the reality based on those rules. And this is what in modern natural language processing is the symbolic approach. It's based on ontologies, taxonomies. Those are defining the structure and then are applied to the specific cases. Or you have the empiricists where you have you presume that you don't have preset rules, you understand from experience. So this is basically what is becoming the modern machine learning, deep learning. The previous slide I was mentioning GP3, that is the leading tool for natural language processing. Pretty much, if you don't use GP3, you may have the risk not to be published, is that much. But you have this monster, 175 billion parameters feeding a neural network, pretty much representing the brain, but not the use of the brain. It's based on the concept of similarity, but we don't reasoning in terms of similarity only. There are different layers. So our approach is basically to put together the symbolic and the machine learning with an additional layer of user interface and visualization to address the request or the needs of the defense acquisition workforce. The project is based on previous projects that we developed for the DoD. In particular, I'm referring to one project, 25 researchers, and I created what I call the room theory. It's the room theory because it's based on a framework theory created by Marvin Minsky. And the example that he used was when you step into a room, you understand that it's a bedroom, a bathroom, not because it is a label, but because you know that there are things defining one or the other. This representation from Minsky didn't have any computational flavor on it because it was middle of the 70s and computers were there, but were not particularly powerful, let's say. So the idea that I implemented was to create a vectorized version of a knowledge base that is representing the knowledge of the reader of the document, the recipient of the document, and use that to evaluate the distance between a set of keywords defining the areas of interest for the research and the documents that you want to analyze. In this particular case, we collected documents for a previous project, one of the projects I was mentioning before, representing the knowledge of contracting officers. So from the academic knowledge, meaning some knowledge MBA-like, some knowledge law school-like, and some knowledge that is more specific of the acquisition. So we ended up with 537 documents for a total of 120 unique words or around that. So with this big corpus, we transform the text into vectors, creating a matrix that is the computational representation of the knowledge base of a contracting officer. Obviously, is a subset, is an approximation, like all the models. Then we defined the elements of interest, so those benchmarks. So benchmarks are keywords, synonyms, and misspelling of the same words. So those are the elements that we want to target. Then we took the documents and we compare the words in the documents with the words in the benchmark using the vectors from the room. And based on that, we ended up with numbers defining how much close is each document to each benchmark. And then we had visualizations. The problem then was dealing with large documents. When you have a large document, let's say 500 pages, you can have some interesting things, but probably a lot of things that are not that much interesting. And then also the things that are interesting, not necessarily they are in the same paragraph. So they can be in page 1, in page 6, and then in a footnote, things like that. Meaning we had to redefine the document, reshuffling the document, creating a sort of semantically similar virtual paragraphs. So the process that I created, it's based on splitting the document into sentences, and it is a mechanical process. Transform the sentences into vector. So we use word2vec. It's an approach. We can talk for quite a while on this step, but let's say that we use an algorithm to transform words into vectors. Then we took all those vectors, we applied a clustering algorithm that is, a machine learning algorithm, creating virtual paragraphs. Then those virtual paragraphs were kind of documents, and we compare each paragraph with the benchmark using the room. And then at that point, each paragraph had a rank, meaning the level of proximity or similarity of each paragraph to each document. And then we highlighted physically on the PDF the sentences that are part of the virtual paragraphs that are more relevant. And then we also rearranged the document into those virtual paragraphs with the virtual paragraphs that are more interesting at the top and all the other following. We created a graphical user interface. So you have a drop box where you can drop your document or documents. And then the result that the system is generating is the same document that you provided, but with highlighted physically, automatically highlighted the results, the sentences in the document. We also have a way to compare multiple files. So that's an example. We used a document that was not a recommendation as a control file, and is the one that you see on the right side. And this is a way to see what are the documents that are more relevant. Then obviously you can drill down into the paragraphs. And then a sort of a 3D version, drilling down on the single benchmarks, the single elements that you want to target. So next steps. We want to improve this knowledge base. We want to expand those key points. We want to revise the paragraphing. We want to reevaluate the document using a level of relevance. We want to integrate better the paragraphings with the graphs, improve the user interface. So those are, let's say, minor changes to the system that right now is more a proof of concept, but is working proof of concept than a real system. This is concluding my presentation. It's 14 minutes and 44 seconds. And I really thank you for listening to me. And I hope that was interesting to you.
Fantastic, Carlo. Very interesting, actually. Having read the paper, hearing you talk about it in your presentation really cemented some things in for me that I didn't quite capture when I read through it the first time, because it's really deep topic and something is a little off my normal things that I drink in every day. And I'm going to have a question for you in a second, but first I want to talk a little bit about some observations. So one of the things that is particularly concerning to me about how we do operational tests, I'm sorry to bring it back to me, but hey, I'm the panel moderator, I'm going to invoke that right, is trying to figure out how the operational test community gets more engaged in the early stages of product development lifecycle, and I refer to that as shift left. And some of the things Bruce talked about, understanding your data sets, having, the part of the test data off to the side where your training data people aren't going to be able to see it, so you know whether or not you're getting the results that you're hoping to get out of having that kind of capability. And so that was interesting as well. And then Carlo, one of the things that I was thinking about as I was listening to your presentation is, and one of the things we have lots and lots of ports. They're all in documents, and so they're not harvestable in a way we could apply machine learning or artificial intelligence. And the idea of having the room construct that you put together, if that might be a way of turning that kind of completely unstructured, only a bunch of documents and maybe using some tooling like what you prescribed could possibly be used to illuminate some things that otherwise are just lost in a sea of completely unconnected documents. So something maybe we could talk about during the Q&A. So let's go ahead and I'm going to ask, I think we got one question already from the team out there. Oh, it's from my friend and colleague, first met at the Acquisition Research Symposium, probably, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, Dr. David Tate from the Institute for Defense Analysis. David, thanks very much for helping us with our first question. It goes to Bruce, and he asks, could you say a few words about how and when operational effectiveness metrics get translated into AI algorithmic metrics, that is, precision and recall, or actually, for example, precision and recall, and the associated training penalties, and how does that map to the LOR framework? So, Bruce, can you turn on your camera and give that one a shot for us?
Got it. Yeah. So good question. I actually thought it was a setup question. So I don't know, like someone who's seen some of my work before. Okay. So yeah, we didn't get into the latter set of tasking where it goes into ROC or PR type of stuff, balanced, unbalanced classes. But it's basically all there. We go into a lot of detail into those structures, and the best way I would say for me to answer it without getting too technical is I can always send that person the detailed document that has all of them, and then we can have a side discussion. But it goes into also sweet spots associated with on the ROC or the PR. Comparing various algorithm structures, because one of the issues I have is everyone loves neural nets, right? Deep neural nets. Oh yeah, that's the latest thing. But there's a lot of things I saw earlier from my other colleagues here presenting, like SVCs, and there's random forests are like an incredible technology that's not really used, but there's a lot of other technologies. How much bang for the buck are you getting out of neural nets where you need maybe 30,000 samples where you can use a random forest for 2,000 samples? I'm not sure, but we talk about doing comparisons and doing analysis. So when you're down there, you're actually using those types of metrics. Hopefully that answers your question. I'd be willing to send you the specifics on the paper. It's a 75-page paper. So.
All right. All right. That's actually a good start, and hopefully you'll get a chance to connect with Dave. He's got a great head on his shoulders. Cesare, I want to ask about your paper talked about the dependencies between variables and uncertainty and quantification. And one of the things I was wondering about is in your research, and when it came to different stakeholders, if you contended with perspectives, because different people's perspectives, depending on what they do for a living as stakeholders, might have a strong effect on how they see the value of capability. Is that something you guys played around with?
Yeah, we played around a little bit with that, especially because we had to go at some point to system of system performance. So the way we do it is a lot of utility theory and just try to use this concept of usefulness or utility and try to compare capabilities in different areas. Even if all stakeholders agree, as like what tells me is a capability for an air strike is more important than a capability for a naval strike. Like there's no way to compare that. So the only way is if stakeholders agree on some formal quantifiable metric that can be used in multiple fields, that makes it easier. Otherwise, we'll always have to somehow normalize that. And then, of course, sensitivity analysis. So it's the only way we can deal with the uncertainty, the only way we can put people together. And this is still in the good case where we are controlling the stakeholder. Then there's the bad case of like, yeah, they don't even tell us what is their preference. Right.
That's a great point. People, right? So I want to go back to Carl. By the way, for those of you out there in the audience, all 26 of you, I'm urgently looking forward to your questions. In the meantime, I'm just going to make some up. Carlo, could you pick up and run maybe with that? And I apologize if my question is completely off topic with the nature of your research, but I was moved by a potential vector it could go in, and that's related to the thing I was talking about earlier about using it to parse through large number of documents that are by their very nature unstructured and not very well put together in a way that you can use automation to pull out trends and do analysis. So I've got, my office was initiated by Congress in 1983. We've had an annual report on weapon systems performance ever since, but we don't have a way to kind of like look across them to derive trends or do deep analysis. So I'm wondering if first of all, if my question is completely off base, and then if in fact some of the work you've done might be applicable to the problem that I have.
Sure, thank you, Nick. It's definitely on base. In particular, when you have to do with text, that is unstructured by definition, the key point is that you have text and you want to take decisions based on text. Meaning you need to define somehow a way to bridge between the text and metrics that you can extract from the text to get elements for the action that you want to take. The method that we created is just doing that, is bridging the text and the numbers. In one of the projects that we did, we analyzed news, patents, and papers to recreate the competitive scenario in technology between nations. Meaning, what are the technologies that are changing the balance in the geopolitical scenario? So we apply the concept to a sort of mock system. Instead of considering countries, we considered companies, and in particular companies in the defense industry in a broad sense, just to have something that we could publish. But the concept was you have text, you have patents, papers, and news, and from that you want to extract elements that are letting you understand that there is something that is changing in the scenario. So you have a risk panel where you have the different opponents, and the risk panel is changing pretty much in a dynamic way based on the documents you have. So here's an example that is not completely in line with what you described, but is an example of going through documents and extracting metrics. So it's definitely something that can be done. You need to define what are the criteria, what are the things that you are looking for, and then based on this sort of proximity, but is a semantical proximity, or is a representation of a semantical proximity, then you can have numbers saying this document is something that you may want to read, and in particular in page 16 and 34, there are elements of interest. Things like that can definitely be done.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We do have another question for you, though, from another friend and colleague of mine that I met through the Naval Postgraduate School, honest to God, I think 20 years ago, Dr. Vladis Berzins. He and I have done some research in the past on, of all things, testing. So hopefully he's doing well, but he asks, can you say more about how symbolic and data-driven methods can be made to work together?
Yeah, great point. Recently, there are quite a lot of action on this area, and everybody is realizing that the pure machine learning is not really working in understanding language. Because language has way too much pre-existing knowledge out of the data. So you cannot, I mean, get a meaning from something if the meaning is not there in a clear way. So that's the limitation of the data-driven approach, the machine learning approach. On the other hand, if you go on the symbolic way, then you need to have all the rules. So you know that you cannot jump out of a building because you will die. But there are many other flavors to that assumption. The way that we did is basically to have a representation of the knowledge. So the representation of the knowledge that we have is basically having a computational representation of a knowledge base and use that one as a battlefield for the benchmarks on one side and the document on the other side. So we take the words from those two sides and we do a lookup in terms of the numbers in the knowledge base representing those words, and we calculate the proximity. So the computational version of the knowledge base has been created using machine learning. It's a shallow neural network. The comparison is done using linear algebra. So that is, I mean, one of the tools in machine learning. So that's a way, but the single most important thing, my method, my representation of knowledge may be wrong, but it's a representation of the knowledge. And that's the point. We need a representation of the knowledge before going to the machine learning. Then the machine learning would eventually fall into the model in a sort of a puzzle, but we cannot just think that we'll drop something in a 175 billion parameter model and somehow magically we will get an answer. This is not the way it works.
Okay, well, thank you. Great question. And by the way, Gladys, make sure you give me a call tomorrow. Thanks for your text earlier today. Back to Bruce, if you don't mind. So Bruce, you're familiar with an animal called a data item description, right? Have you ever thought about taking some of the work you've done and creating a draft DID?
No, I never thought about taking it. I wouldn't even know how to go about doing that.
It's really easy. There's a website and everything.
Really?
No, yeah. So let's connect afterwards. I appreciate your work. I think there's some things we can do together.
Okay.
If you don't mind, I wanted to add one thing, what Carlo answered to a previous question, since there's no question right now in the Q&A. I think both the questions that Guertin asked and the other question in the Q&A and the answers that Carlo gave are bringing up some problem that we usually have. This is the acquisition research symposium, but too many times, especially in academia, research stays academic. And we really don't like that in academia. We want research to be applied. And so we have to solve these practical problems. And here, I think both sides need to make an effort. Sometimes we have people telling us, for example, from my point of view, it's like, oh, you are just academia, so you will never be able to address our problem properly. On the other side, we sometimes don't have that shift. So I like the answers that Carlo gave and the questions that Guertin asked, because we need to have these questions of like, okay, this is my specific practical problem. From our perspective, what we say though sometimes is, this is our model. It has limitations. There's something you cannot do. There's people involved. So we need, I think both sides need to make a step towards each other. Like we need more information and data that we need, and people need to also accept our answer that if we want to do practical use of research, we need to do it step by step. We cannot solve the world immediately, but we can start with this limited model. And I think here we're doing really a good job.
Thank you for that insight, Carlo. I've actually published at the Acquisition Research Symposium several times, but I'm more of an applied researcher than a fundamental researcher. So it's a little easier for me to kind of see the connection to practical solutions. But we do also have to have the appetite for fundamental research that helps drive downstream of applied solutions. So, but it's certainly much more fulfilling if you can see a direct use of your hard work. I genuinely appreciate that. Let's see, are there any more questions from the group? The last thing that I want to bring out, and I'd be interested in all three of your inputs on it, and that is, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, the notion of interoperability. I'll take you through a short thought experiment. If a lot of our mission systems are a part of a software reliant solution, tanks, missiles, planes, submarines, everything's got software in some fashion or another. And if we start taking advantage of different development practices that allow us to make smaller changes on a shorter timeline, and we could do that all the way to products that are in the field. I mean, all of those things are technologically possible today. That there will be an impact to how those different mission systems interact with each other, right? We fight as a joint force. We don't send off a mission system and all it does is it's one little thing. It doesn't talk to anybody. So how do we think about the application of machine learning in general to this growing problem of diversity in joint force interoperability? I'd be interested in all three of your opinions. Unfortunately, you only get about a minute each. So Bruce, why don't we start with you?
I believe it's a problem about complexity. I actually wrote a paper for SPY on this specific issue. It's math-based, it's about 33 pages, but I'd love to be able to share it.
Okay, so we got some thought work on that and some already available research. Carlo, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I mean, one of my duties is to be the director for the system for the Center for Complex Systems and Enterprises, and interoperability is part of complexity. So language, most of the time, is a common denominator, and we definitely leverage on language and representation of complexity to address issues like that. That's the 1 minute pitch.
Okay. Cesare, do you have anything you could maybe add on to that part of the conversation?
Yeah, very quickly. I'm doing some of my research projects are with JPO, CBRND, and they do interforce protection for chemical, bacteriological, radiological. They have this issue, and now we're helping doing digital engineering. We are helping them doing digital twins. Long term is much easier. Common representations, a lot of security and safety for data protection. The short term, like Carlo said, is finding common denominators, anything that can be in common. If it's language, if it's some part of the operation that they do, if there's part of the technologies they use, that's a good starting point. It will be a slow process. Like all branches have their own ways to do things. So,
right. Well, without argument, it will be a hard problem. It feels like it's going to take a long time to figure out, but from the operational utility perspective, we don't have a lot of time. So we're going to have to figure out how to apply some new tools to make that long, hard problem shorter. It's not going to be less hard, but just solution space needs to resolve more rapidly. So thank you very much, all three of you, for participation in this panel. Thanks for those of you who stuck around to get to the end. The Acquisition Research Symposium rolls on. Please jump out and go find another interesting panel to listen to. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.